Hello everyone! So today I will be walking you through the process of making this embellished brass crown. I had intended for this to be a relatively simple project, but it got a bit out of hand. It is definitely doable if you enjoy crafting and have some patience, but it certainly isn't as simple as my previous headpiece tutorials. But it does look really lovely when paired with medieval creations, so I think it is well worth the time and effort that it involves. If you would like to know how I made this crown and how you could make one, then please keep on watching. The main thing you need are brass stampings. I purchased mine from High Trimmings in New York City, but you can find similar things on Etsy with search terms like brass stamping filigree or brass stamping teardrop shape. And you'll need enough of these to go around your head. Since mine are 2 inches wide, I purchased 10, but I really should have purchased 11, so measure carefully. And to make those look a bit prettier, you'll need rhinestones and lots of them. If the stampings you buy have indentations in them, make sure to measure them carefully and buy rhinestones that will fit nicely in each one. And depending on the depth of the divots, you may want to buy point-backed rhinestones like these ones. If your stampings don't have indentations for stones, you can buy flat-backed rhinestones and place them wherever you like. You'll also need glue to secure the stones. I'm using E6000. And I'll also be using a syringe, so I'll have more precision when placing the glue. For picking up and placing the rhinestones, I'm using this fancy tool, which I'll link below, but you can also use a birthday candle or wet Q-tips. I also ended up using the things listed here, though I neglected to take close-ups of them. I realize not all of these are household items, so I will be mentioning alternatives throughout the video. Sort your embellishments out by size and place them on a beading mat or paper towel, then open the syringe and remove the plunger. And fill the syringe up with your glue of choice. Then replace the plunger and you're ready to get started. Start by gluing on the largest embellishments first. For this design, that involved placing glue into the 3 diamond-shaped openings at the center of the stamping, and pressing the coordinating stones into the glue. It's worth mentioning that the stones I bought were too deep for the divots in the stampings, so they refused to sit straight, so make sure you measure carefully to avoid this problem. Also, if you don't have a syringe, you can just use a toothpick to place the glue where you want, but the syringe does make the process way easier. Continue by gluing on the second largest set of stones. For me, that involved placing 3 4mm rhinestones near the center of each stamping. And I'm placing these with my fingers since I find that easier than using tweezers. Now add glue to all the remaining divots on the frame. Since I'm working with smaller stones, now I can use the handy dandy wax tool to pick them up and place them exactly where I want. As I said earlier, if you don't have one of these tools, you can use a birthday candle or wet cotton swabs to pick up and place the rhinestones. And once all the stones are added, you should have a beautiful, fully embellished brass stamping. Now you just have to repeat the process on all the remaining stampings. It is a slow process, but it's actually quite fun as well, especially if you do it in front of the TV or listen to music while you're at it. Also, I want to mention that you really shouldn't limit yourself to just placing rhinestones in the divot points. You can put them wherever you want on the stampings, just try to keep them in roughly the same spot on each one. Remember that the placement of the stones will differ depending on the layout of the stampings you buy, how many rhinestones you have, and of course personal preference. Once the glue has fully dried, it's time to remove the spider webby trails of glue that E6000 leaves behind. If you use gem tack or other craft glues, you can probably skip this step, but with E6000 it's a must. I remove the trails with painter's tape that is wrapped around my finger, and I break any stubborn trails of glue with a pin, so they are easier to remove with the tape. Now it's time to attach the brass stampings together to create the crown. I'll be showing you how I did this, then mentioning an easier way if you find this intimidating. I'm using a soldering iron, so I started by flipping the stampings over, then melting some solder at the point where I want them to join together. Then I'm covering the wire I'll use to join them together with solder as well. Then remelting the little puddle of solder I created earlier and pressing the wire into it. Once the solder solidifies, the wire is very well secured to the brass stamping. Then I'm repeating those steps on the stamping I want to join it to, starting by creating a puddle of solder, then melting the puddle of solder and pressing the same wire into it so the 2 stampings sit very close together. When it's set, trim the excess wire and that's it! Now you can see me repeating the process with 2 more stampings. creating the little puddle of solder, coating the wire, remelting the puddle of solder, pressing the wire into it, and repeating on the other side. What is really nice about this is that it's really solid and the solder secures things to the metal much better than any glue. It's also bendable, which is great since we'll be bending it into the shape of a crown. Though this probably isn't a tool that you have around, you can buy a soldering iron and the wires you need for about $20 on Amazon if you're interested. Or you could secure the wire with E6000 instead. If you do that, it's very important to let the glue dry fully before trying to bend it or trim the wire. And you'll want to use tape or binder clips to hold the wire against the stamping while the glue dries. Now you can see that I've finished turning my stampings into duos, and now I'm soldering them into 4-piece long sections. This process will continue until they are all soldered together. I should probably also mention that this was my first attempt at soldering ever, so I'm not an expert, and if you want more information on the process, I'm really not the person to ask. Here I realized that I was one stamping short, so to make the crown bigger I added a brass cameo frame, and to create the band that the stampings are mounted on, I cut out a strip of denim that was 1.5 inches wide and a little bit longer than the length of the stampings after they were soldered together, and then I cut the strip out. As a side note, you do not have to use denim for this, any non-stretch fabric is fine. Fold the strip in half, then draw 2 guidelines. One that is a 1/4 inch away from the folded edge, and one that is a 1/4 inch away from that. Then sew across those lines. I did this by machine with a straight stitch, but you can do it by hand if you prefer that. Trim excess fabric away as close to the bottom line of stitching as you can get. Then trim plastic boning to the length of the denim and insert one piece into each channel. If you don't have access to plastic boning, you can use zip ties instead. Then cut out a 2-inch wide strip of fabric to cover the denim. I'm using velvet, but you can use whatever material you like. Fold the edges of the velvet inward, then fold the strip over the denim layer. And tuck the ends of the velvet inward so there aren't any raw edges visible. Sew the folded edges of the velvet together. Doing this should keep all the raw edges tucked away and smoothly cover the denim layer. Now place the brass stampings over top and sew them on with thread in a matching color. I'm using whip stitches for this because I found that was the easiest. This part is definitely optional, but I chose to bead the base of the crown. I sewed an 8mm glass montee between each brass stamping. Then I stitched a 4mm fake pearl and size 13 seed bead onto either side of the montee. Then I brought the thread out at the center point of each brass stamping at the bottom edge of the border, and I repeated the process of sewing on a glass montee, then framing it with a fake pearl and seed bead. I repeated this process several times before I realized that it looked a little bit dull, so I chose to connect the montees on the lower edge of the base with more seed beads. Unfortunately, I'm not really sure how to explain this process and I don't have footage that shows it clearly, but I promise you it comes quite naturally when you're doing it. Once the process is finished, sew the ends of the band together to turn the strip of fabric and brass stampings into a circlet. Then finish beading the back portion. You should also solder one more join point at the back to connect the brass stamping into a circlet. And that's it! The overly complicated crown is done. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll stick around for the next one. I actually filmed the making of this entire costume that goes with the crown, so hopefully those videos will be up soon. And I have a few other headpiece tutorials on this channel that I will link below if you're interested, along with the materials that I used for this project. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a really fantastic day.